we're in period 4. We're at the very tail end of period 4. So if you are, if you're studying in your class, you're a little bit off from this, that's okay. This is going to be actually next week. We're going to do DBQs, and then the week after we'll do one big unit 4 review session. But this is the last key concept in unit 4. So last week we did a whole CCOT session on the social classes, the castas, and coerced labor and slavery. The week before that, I did a whole session on the Columbian Exchange. So right now we're going to talk about the land and sea empires that really ruled in this era, right? Like this time period, 1450 to 1750, is all about power. Like who has it, how they got it, how they maintain it, right? To be in charge of an entire empire takes a lot. Like what is it that it takes to actually rule that land? We're also going to see some of the biggest empires ever in this time period. So obviously the Mongols were before. That's the biggest land empire that ever existed. But now we're going to start to see these sea empires that, have colonies everywhere and are across the world. All right, let's jump in. Okay, so like I said, at any point, put questions in there. I'll stop as we go and make sure that your questions are getting answered. And then I'll definitely have time at the end to do Q&A for whatever you guys need. So I highly recommend that you take notes. Obviously it's not mandatory, but worth it. You got a test coming up and you can still get 2 college credits for AP World. So you guys are the last ones. Next year it's AP World Modern. So make use of that now, get credit for what you can. All right, so this is a map coming from Freemanpedia, Benjamin Freeman. He has just the dopest graphics on his website. So if you're looking for maps and charts, he's got all kinds of great stuff. And so this map is just perfect because this shows exactly what we're going to talk about tonight. All right, so you can see the entire world with all the layout of who's in charge of where. All right, so we've got land empires all these ones over here, like the Manchus, Russia, Mughals, Ottomans, all these different land empires. And then you have these sea empires as well that are cutting across oceans, right? So Portugal has, colonies in different places. Britain is one of the biggest empires ever. The Dutch, the French, all of them are part of this story. And so I think what makes this time period different, where this change is around how much of the world is now covered by somebody's rule. There's still a lot of land that's not uninhabited, of course, but isn't ruled by some major empire, right? So you can see a lot of Africa, some of that northern Canada, Australia, and Eastern Europe separately. Those are ruled by different people, but a lot of the land in the world is pretty much covered, right? And then the next unit, that's when the rest of it is going to quickly get taken up by those who come out of this time period with power still. So first, let's just talk about this key concept. Talks through the actual empire, so I'll kind of cut through those for you so you have the most important things. And then but then first I want to talk about in order for there to be an empire in power, people need a reason to obey who is in power, right? Someone can't just come to power and be I'm in charge now and that's it. And everyone's not going to just be okay with that. There needs to be some legitimacy to their political power. And that can come in a lot of different forms. So throughout history, there's been all different types of ways that a ruler will legitimize their power. Right? So tell me some examples in the chat of ways that that you've studied already in AP World of how an empire has legitimized their rule. How does the emperor or the king or the queen or the president or the prime minister or the pharaoh, right? How do all these people say I'm the one in power, and then how do they get their people to believe them, to be okay with that, right? To not only be okay with that, to rally for them, right? To fight for them, to keep them in power. So some of your guys' examples, mandate of heaven is perfect, right? That's something that's used in China across history, where they're saying the gods chose me to be next. Therefore, I'm the rightful heir to this throne. Absolutism, we're going to talk about tonight. Divine right, exactly. religious propaganda, the Pope through religion, conquest, right? So you can be elected to power, therefore, like, your rule is legitimate because people elected you and people believe in the election system. It can be through religion, a god appointed me, right? Or I am chosen by the gods. It can be wealth. I have so much money that, like, what are you gonna do? Come for me, right? Fear, right? Like, I'm in power because if you're not cool with it, I'll kill you. That's another way to do it. Dependency, like, the people who are in power, you don't even, doesn't matter because I'm just dependent for my survival. So, they can stay in power if they want. I just need food, right? So, like, lots of different ways. And let's look at a couple different examples from this time period in particular. So some of you guys mentioned these. Using religion to legitimize your power. This is a really important concept in this time period, but it comes up plenty of times before this. So basically, if all your people believe in the same religion, if your constituents, right, the people that live in your empire, you can kind of keep them in line with your government because you can align religion and government. So just like divine right? If the God that all these people believe in authorized the king's power, then the king is held accountable to that God, and the people are going to be like, well, our God chose this king, so it must be legitimate. It works perfectly well for that king. Aztec sacrifices was another example. Historians don't like truly know exactly what that did, but there's a couple of different things going on where basically people would give tribute to the leaders, the Aztec leaders, in the form of humans, right? So literally human sacrifice. So there's obviously some form of fear there, also some unity in, like, this is what we do collectively. But this is an example of using religion, using like belief systems to legitimize your rule. And then the last one that I just put on this slide is the Confucian rituals, right? So using Confucianism, just like the Mandate of Heaven, using the civil service system, using those bureaucratic ways in order to make your government respectable. It aligns with how the people believe, how they see government. And so the Manchus adopt the ways that the Chinese dynasties had done before. Even though the Manchus are sort of this minority that comes to power, they appropriate those rituals. And so 3 examples here of using religion. By the way, this would be an awesome question that you could see on an exam. I don't know if we haven't seen one in the last few years, but some kind of like comparison where you do compare like how rulers have legitimized power. So, like, really make sure you know what that phrase means, legitimizing power, because that could totally be a question on the exam. It could be an LEQ prompt. All right, so another way that across time people have legitimized power is through architecture. Build big and pretty things, others will respect you, right? If I can build this palace, I can build this massive wall, or yikes, or like, whatever. If I can build a pyramid, people will respect me because look at what I accomplished, right? So history repeats itself, okay? So you've got the Taj Mahal as the example of this time period. We posted that on Instagram today. The Mughals, Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal as a mausoleum, a tomb for his wife. But it really blends together this like Islamic, Persian, Indian, Hindu, it's kind of like a syncretic architecture. And so it's this big, powerful thing. And there you go, right? Like, people will then see that, and then you respect the ruler because they were able to build that. They had the money, they had the manpower, they had the time, the vision. And so it's respectable. Another example is the like Palace of Versailles, right? So like Louis XIV of France built the Palace of Versailles, which is just like massive. I mean, 712,000 square feet is massive. So build this massive palace, live in it, and be this like all being, and there you go, right? Like, Look at what I built. I built this big and pretty thing. Therefore, you should respect me. What do you think? Does this work? If you build a big and pretty thing, is this the way to do it? You know? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there isn't really an answer to that question, but what are other examples? Let me ask you this. Other examples of architecture that have been built to legitimize power. Other examples. So, like, give me other examples across history of buildings that rulers built in order to flaunt their power, flaunt their wealth. You know, sometimes those things have a use, you know, like a palace, you live in it. Mausoleum is a tomb. Sometimes they're not super useful. But like, why build big, giant things, right? So these are good examples here. Pyramids, Eiffel Tower could be one of just like, look at this massive thing. Even like, right, Statue of Liberty, it's like right there, even though like the US didn't build it. It's still like, it's this like welcoming thing. St. Basil's Cathedral, for sure, that comes up in this time period. The Great Wall, Grand Canal. Let's see, what else we got? Ziggurats. Yeah. Washington Monument. Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it's kind of like any massive monument, right? The Hagia Sophia, for sure. You know, it's like you can build any of these things. You can build a temple, a mosque. You can build any of these things smaller. They don't have to be massive, like the Colosseum, but may as well go big. Then we can prove how powerful we are. All right, let me check out questions. Whoop. All right, so instead of just like posting a prompt in the questions, like this one, explain contributing factors, like that's definitely just like a prompt that you need to answer. Like, break that down and ask me something that you don't understand about it, because I'm not going to just like break down that entire prompt. It looks like someone posted a link that could help you out, but Ellie, my suggestion to you is like post a question to like of something about that you don't understand, and I'll go through that at the end. Okay. So I don't want to just like do you guys' homework. I want you to do your homework. All right. So other pieces, and then we'll get into like the different empires. So in this time period, because you have an expansion of empire, I mean, you saw that map. These empires are expanding everywhere. The empires themselves are becoming more diverse. So the bigger the empire, the more diverse it will be, right? People are not the same everywhere. So, you know, as Rome expanded in the classical era, they became more diverse, just like now in the early modern era. As the British Empire expanded across the seas, it became more diverse. As, you know, the Russian Empire expanded, it became more diverse. So because of that, there's this need to essentially like limit the influence of minority groups, because there's a fear that those minority groups will then, you know, overthrow the majority, right? Like this is like the heart of, you know, racist societies, right? Like societies that build hierarchies out of necessity because there's a need to like limit that influence. There's a nervousness. And so one of the examples that Patrick Lassiter talked about last week, when he did like a whole long thing, a CCOT exactly about this. But the castas in the Americas were this social ranking system based on race, based on the mixture of your race. And so in doing this, they limited the jobs, the influence, the political, you know, political rights that people had based on their race. So this kept like the more connected to Spain and Portugal you were, and more white you were, the more power you had. The less white you were, the least power you had. Totally worth knowing these terms. Really, really good for evidence points in any LEQ, right? So like peninsulares, they're literally coming from the Iberian Peninsula, born in Spain and Portugal. They would have had the most influence. The Creoles would have been born in the New World, in the Americas, but of European descent. Mestizos is a mixture of European and native, and mulatto is a mixture of European and African. Today, most of the population of Mexico is mestizo. Fun fact. So the other examples, and there's a bunch in this time period, but the Ottomans also had a very diverse region. And so what they did, the Ottoman Empire was Muslim. They kind of carved out these other territories which was part of the Millet system, where they would have these like local rulers be in charge. So there was like a territory for Christians, a territory for Jews, a territory for each different religion, essentially. So by doing that, their thinking was they have their own land, they have their own ruler, they won't overthrow the Ottoman Empire, right? Yeah, history is going to repeat itself a lot, and it's all about power. All right, let's get into the empires. Okay, so keep in mind, post your questions as you have them. You guys can also use the chat whenever I'm checking out the chat as well. So we're first going to cut through the land-based empires. I'm just going to give you a couple of fun facts, not really fun facts, but like a couple facts about each empire. We're not going to go like super in depth on each one. Like your textbooks are probably covering each of these pretty in depth, but to be honest, like just know the major things about them. Like you don't get caught in this like cycle of details. This is where students get really stressed out, really like overwhelmed, because a time period like this feels like there's just so much to know, so many people, so many dates, so many things. But like just focus on the big picture. Like we're looking at land and sea empires and how they maintain power. So know how each one came to power, how they ruled. And then just like what was their impact, right? Like, so what? They existed. So what? Stick with those two things. This question about can I explain Japan? I'm not going to talk about Japan tonight. Japan came up to be honest, Japan doesn't really come up all that much in the early modern era. We talk about it in like the post-classical era with feudalism, and then for sure in the next two periods. But if you have a specific question about Japan, post it. But I don't know what about Japan you want to know. All right, so the Manchus. So the Manchus come after the Ming dynasty in China, right? So, thank you, silver trade. Okay, so be specific about your question then. The Ming, pretty much by the 1600s, were pretty weak, were corrupt. So the Manchus were able to overthrow them. So Manchus come to power in 1644. They are a minority group that's ruling a majority. So they, it's not like a typical setup, right? Because usually you have like majority ruling minority. But in this case, this is minority group ruling majority. And so they kept like the highest positions in power for Manchus only, because obviously like they were concerned that if they let the majority of like the Chinese, come to power, that they would take power back from them. So they keep the highest positions just for the Manchus. They're incredibly centralized and bureaucratic. They use the Confucian systems, right? The mandate of heaven, the civil service system, extremely bureaucratic. Remember, bureaucracy, like quick reminder of bureaucracy. Think of like a dresser, right? With like drawers. You have different departments for each like part of society, right? So you've got a department that's in charge of, defense and education and taxes and agriculture and everything, like just like we have now, like with a cabinet. This is bureaucracy, right? Just think of that like a bureau, a dresser. So at the same time, because of the Columbian Exchange, there's tons of new foods coming into China. So the population is increasing a ton. And so the Manchus are profiting off of that. And from the silver trade. So they're doing pretty well. I'm going to move on now from the Manchus. All right, Mughals, moving over to India. So the Mughal literally is Persian for Mongol. Okay, so they were Turks that were of Mongol descent and took lands in India. So they come to power really through this like military elite, firepower. So just like, we were talking about, how does someone come to power? Well, if they've got weapons and they've got strength, they're building fear. They're going to overthrow me. They're going to kill me in this society. So, okay, you're in charge, So the rulers were different religion than the ruled, right? So the Mughals are Muslim and the most of India is Hindu. So you do have this balance, just like the Manchus, right? You have this difference where you have a difference in the religion of who is in charge and the religion of who they're ruling over. One person to know from the Mughals would be Akbar. He was really religiously tolerant, so he like removed the taxes that were put on non-Muslims. He removed those, and then also created a lot of new revenues. So was incredibly wealthy and made a lot of money for the Mughals. And this was just by basically the zamindars were there before, were kind of this in between in collecting taxes, and so he bypassed them, right? So they're this like noble group. So instead of having to rely on them in collecting taxes to then pay to the government, which by the way they didn't do all the time, they weren't very good at, they would take some of the money. So forget them, I'm just going to collect the taxes straight from the people. And so by doing that, he really like legitimized his power and kind of removed that that threat of this like noble society. Two religions is Hindu and Muslim, yes. So Mughals would be Muslim and the rest of India was Hindu. All right. Ottomans. So the Ottoman Empire extends a really long time. It doesn't end until World War I. So it's going to go straight through period 5 and into period 6. But it's in this time period, in period 4, that it begins. So after the Mongols conquer the Seljuks, who are Egyptian, it kind of clears the way. So now you don't have to deal with the Seljuks anymore. After the Mongols kind of lose their power too, it kind of opens the door. So the Ottomans come marching through. Constantinople falls in 1453. I've said this before, you don't need to know dates. You can get a 5 on AP World without remembering any date. But there are some dates that are worth knowing. 1453 is one. It's pretty much like, why does this time period start in 1450? That, yes, Columbus is 40 years later traveling to the New World, and that's a massive turning point. But why not then start this time period in 1492? This is why, right? Start it in 1450 because the Ottomans taking over the Byzantine Empire, the fall of the Byzantines, is like the end of the post-classical era. Like, this is like a massive turning point right here. So their empire was just like was about constant expansion, right? The more they expanded, the more money they made, the more land they had to feed their horses, to contribute to their food surplus and everything. So all about expansion. They just kind of continued expanding. This map is 1801, so you can see by the end of this time period how much they expanded. One important term to know from them is the devshirm. Anyone know how to pronounce that? This is one of those like AP World terms that I'm always like, how do you say that one? So basically what they would do is they would conquer the conquered Christians that they conquered in this region had to essentially send their young boys to become part of the troops, the Ottoman troops. So they would like kind of give them up. And those boys would now be dependent on the state, right? They have to, they're like tied to the state. They're committed to working for them. And a lot of them then became these Janissaries, this like elite loyal warriors that were incredibly connected, right? They're empowered. They're not going to go anywhere. They're going to fight for the state. This is what they do. So wasn't the Christians had to send their firstborn son? I mean, it was probably their firstborn son, but it was sending of Christian boys. This is just like what to remember. Dev Shirma. All right. Safavids were Sunni, Ottomans were Shiites. Yes. I know, it's a lot to remember. All right, so basically from this time period, Ottomans, just remember expansion, and that Dev Sharma and Janissaries, those terms come up too. I've seen multiple choice questions that relate back to that. And then we'll swing back to the Ottomans in a couple weeks when we talk about industrialization, because they're a good case study of that. Okay, Russia. I forgot to finish this slide. All right, so in Russia, you've got there should be a lot more listed under Peter the Great, but basically you've got, once they become free from the Mongols, once the Mongols are sort of out of the picture, the Russians are going to expand dramatically. I mean, dramatic. Like, look at how much land they have. You know, like that's just like so much of the continent. A lot of the like the Mongol territory that they had, and the Russians are also going to really like push for reforms and westernizing, and so that they you know, can kind of catch up with the rest of the world. All right, looks like you guys in the chat, thank you for correcting this, and we'll just bring this back for a second. So the Ottomans are Sunni, the Safavid are Shiite. I get it mixed up just like you guys do. So thank you so much. Shout out to Amy T for clearing that up. All right, so a couple people to remember from this empire would be Ivan III. This is Ivan the Great. There's also an Ivan the Terrible in this time period. Ivan III is the one that kind of deemed Moscow as Third Rome. He married an heir to the Byzantine Empire, and in doing so was like, you know, look, now we're connected to this Roman lineage. And so it's basically a connection between, you know, it's a continuity of imperial Rome into Russia. So that's an important point. Peter the Great is also a really interesting figure, really important to know. And I got to add some more points under him, but basically he drafts the peasants. He's incredibly, he builds, yeah, St. Petersburg would be Peter the Great. Put some other things in the chat, things that you know about Peter the Great. He is westernizing it. He traveled quite a bit around Europe, and when he comes back, he's like, we got some work to do. You know, we got to do things like them. You know, so you've never heard of him because you hate reading. You definitely should read the textbook. Is it bad that you haven't talked about St. Peter? No, I mean, look, this class is not AP Euro. You know, like it's Peter the Great is not going to come up all that much. It's tough because I feel like I constantly am like, that won't be on the test, or like skip that. It's not that I'm like, you know, skip it, but it's really been it really, like, especially in the way that they're moving, this course is really about big patterns and big topics. You know, like if you don't really know like one person in general, like it's not gonna like kill your score. And in this particular example, like I haven't seen a ton about Russia in this time period, other than just like big patterns. But again, you know, it's like, of course, now that I say this, the question this year is going to be that. And this someone pointed out here, Amy, it's an example of legitimizing rule. Yes, right. So like Ivan III, in marrying the Byzantine heir, that's exactly what he's doing. Because now he can look at the former Byzantines, he can look at anyone in like Eastern Europe or of Eastern Orthodox Christianity and say, look, I'm part of you, right? This is an extension of that empire that used to exist. So that would be all about Russia. I know, just to like give Freemanpedia another shout out, I know he's doing a bunch of stuff on his website about Russia. So if you want more content of just about Russia to kind of just understand their whole timeline, there's a lot of good stuff on that site. All right, so let's get into, actually, let me just check out the questions. All right, I'll go back to that one. Did hierarchies. Okay. When did Sikhism come to power? come to be was during the Mughal Empire. Yes. So I mean, think about it, right? So like you've got Muslims in power of the Mughals, and then you have this Hindu society. And so it makes sense that this like blending of the two would exist in this time period, right? As a way to legitimize rule, but also just like as just a cultural phenomenon, you know. There's a lot of people of two groups. They're gonna blend, they're gonna combine, they're gonna create something new from what they have. Syncretism, yes. Know as many examples of syncretism as you can, you know. It's just something really easy to bring up in an essay like that. After Constantinople fell, what went on with it? So Constantinople will eventually become Istanbul. I don't know like the exact year that it like that's when it's Istanbul. You know, basically the Ottomans conquer Constantinople. So like the city continues. It's still like a port, a massive port for trade. And it's just no longer a Byzantine city. It's now an Ottoman city. What's the significance of Potosi? So Potosi would be where the like silver mines were. So like even on this map, I can kind of show you. So like Potosi would have been like around here-ish. And basically there would have been a lot of silver coming from there that would have been mined. And then I got to like refresh my memory on the silver trade. But essentially you know what I'll do is I'll loop back on the silver trade and probably post something about it. Post something extra about the silver trade, because I think that's something that I've kind of skipped over in all this period 4 stuff. So we'll definitely bring it back in 2 weeks and probably talk about the silver trade next week when we do the DBQ. So we'll do the silver flow DBQ next week. We're going to kind of like do that together. So if you haven't written that yet, this is a really good, definitely like show up next week. And actually you can like register for next week right now. It's on the same page. So you'll get reminded. All right. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the sea empires. This question. The Incas mined silver at Potosi, right? Yeah. Well, they were like enslaved to mine the silver there. That would have been like part of the like Mita system. So, all right. So this map is super cool. It's basically showing the like trade routes that existed in this time period. So you can see, you know, all of these things are connected, you know, like we talk about the Columbian exchange and the silver flow and the, you know, just globalized trade. And we're talking about the expansion of empire, but these things are part of the same story, you know? So and this map, I think really does show that. You know, I think you can see here. So the red are the Spanish trade routes. So you can see where they're going, you know, mostly. They're very much, you know, connected into West Africa, into the Caribbean, obviously into Spain, and then into South America, into Brazil. And then you can see the British trade routes coming into Canada and all the different colonies, right? So obviously like the 13 colonies would have existed, you know, by this time period. And so they're coming from Britain and like hitting into North America, into the Caribbean. South Africa was a British colony, all the way over into India, right? So, you know, you can kind of trace where they go here. And then the Dutch in green. So you can see the Dutch coming, you know, from the Netherlands. And then same thing. They're kind of going around the same paths, right? It's very similar, but it's also a little bit different. So just like the amount of trade that's happening in this time period is massive. And it really, colonies were sort of like a means to an end, right? Like if I'm going to be going here often, or like if I can have a port right here, then it makes this like shipment of slaves a lot easier, right? So you have this connection of like, you know, take over more land, it'll just make it easier to like trade with people and to get more resources from that land, more markets from those people. You know, we'll dig into imperialism a lot more into period 5, but colonialism this is what's happening in this time period. This is how these sea-based empires are existing in the first place. So like I'm just going to show you a couple maps here just so you can see. In terms of like what do you need to know about each of these empires, I think the most important thing to know is just a couple of their colonies. Like know where they were influential. I think that is important to like stick to. Other than that, you don't need to get super in depth on like who was in charge and you know, some of the other pieces. Like it just doesn't come up on this test. But like how they spread their wealth and where. So the Portuguese, you know, obviously Portugal. Brazil would be like one of the biggest colonies of Portugal. So like they become independent in the 19th century, but Brazil is like a massive colony for Portugal. You also have got Angola and Mozambique, which would have been the two like most important African colonies for Portugal. You know, like actually me in particular, my family is from Brazil, and so I did my like DNA thing a couple years ago and found that actually none of my DNA came from the Americas. It mostly came from the Iberian Peninsula and Africa. And it literally like had like Bantu DNA. It was like 6% Bantu from this region. And so like I don't know what that family history for me looks like, but that means that there's for sure African slaves that were brought to Brazil from these regions, from Angola or from Mozambique to Brazil, and then you know, and then my family exists in Brazil and then immigrates to different places. But that's just like kind of how you can see the like Portuguese Empire. There's also tons of different smaller colonies across India and Indonesia that the Portuguese have control of. For example, Goa in India still today is very Portuguese influence. It's a super cool place, kind of like a hippie beach town in India. Uh, Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if you haven't done your DNA or like if someone in your family hasn't done it, I like highly recommend. I just think it was so worth it to like find that out. And it was just kind of like it was like all of AP world history for me, like in my DNA, right? It was just like cool. So the Spanish Empire is like the third largest empire in world history. The first one is the British Empire, which you'll see a map of in a second. The second one was the Mongols, which would have been the largest land-based empire, and then the Spanish. So like the Spanish have a ton of area, right? So the Spanish have, you know, obviously Spain is on here, but then they've got a huge chunk of North America and all of Central America and the entire west coast of South America, and what would this be like? Indonesia or no, the Philippines. Sorry, so this would have been the Philippines, right? So like what you just said, right? So the Manila galleons with silver trade, right? So this is where the Spanish were connecting to the Philippines for that to then trade with China, trade with Japan. I don't remember what region this is. This would have been like I think the Cape Verde Islands are up here. I'm trying to like memorize this map. So Spanish are everywhere, and what's fascinating about the Spanish and the Portuguese is like they're just like these massive empires in this time period, and then they just sort of like they lose a lot of power very quickly, considering how big they were. You know, obviously by the end of this period, like most of this territory in the United States gets purchased as part of like the Louisiana Purchase. A lot of this area does, and then or gets like conquered. You know, like Mexico will come into power later on. These regions will then become independent. So they really like suffer from a lot of the like independence movements. It's kind of weird to think of like the empire suffering, but I don't know. Power to the people. Am I right? So the Dutch. The Dutch are not as influential as the Portuguese and the Spanish, but they are really influential when it comes to the like joint stock companies. The VOC was like a massive joint stock company, which was basically like early form of crowdfunding, right? So instead of paying for my journey myself and colonizing this territory, let's pool our money together. and go do it together. So if the ship sinks, we don't all lose. We all lose some, but we don't lose everything. So kind of early crowdfunding. So the Dutch, the most important place for the Dutch that you should keep in mind is Indonesia, which will then become independent in the 20th century, 1949. It's crazy. And then there's a couple other places, some of these smaller places in like northern South America. And I guess some of Brazil. Let's see, New Netherlands. Yeah, so they like had a little bit of land in North America, but literally for like 40 years. So the Dutch, don't spend too much time studying on the Dutch. Just know Indonesia, that was their territory. Okay, and then of course the British. I mean, you can kind of, it's easy to remember like who was a British colony because they speak English, and oftentimes drive on the other side of the road, right? So the British just had so much territory. Australia, which became a penal colony later on, where they literally sent their prisoners to. India, which they'll take more control of in the 19th century, but have control of in this time period. Have like a connection with. Burma, South Africa, tons of regions within Africa, Canada, the 13 colonies, obviously until the American Revolution, even some area in Antarctica. So like the British Empire is the largest empire that has ever existed. So like this is the one. And obviously so much of these lands have become independent, are independent today, are not part of the British Empire, although some of them still are. Some of them still, like the Falkland Islands, some of the like random islands in here are still part of, like, consider themselves under the British crown. Might use the pound, or at least like you can see like remnants of like the Queen in their things. Let me just see. I think there's one more, the French. So where were the French? The French were mostly in West Africa, and same thing today. French is a widely spoken language in West Africa for this reason. They also have a huge chunk of North America, Canada, right? So like Quebec would speak French today, and Madagascar, parts of India, Vietnam. Vietnam is a big one because the independence of Vietnam is like a 30-year war in the 20th century. So we'll talk about that when we get to period 6. This question, can I explain the silver trade? I'm going to do that more next week. So make sure we'll talk about the silver trade next week when we talk about DBQs. So, I don't want to get into that right now, but make sure to RSVP for next week's live stream next Monday night at 8 p.m. So on the same page that you're watching this, you can see next week's stream, and you can RSVP for that. So just save your spot so that you'll be there. You'll be notified when we're live on that. And we'll go over the silver trade next week. So there's a lot of pieces to it. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and I'm going to answer some questions. So remember, if you want a copy of these slides, and actually, let me just show you guys really quick what it looks like, what Fiveable looks like. Boom. All right, so when you become a Fiveable Plus member, which I hope many of you guys do, because I really want to help you guys pass these tests, and it's $20 right now, and once you're in, you got all the subjects. So if you're taking more than one AP class, you can review for whatever you want, except for the AP teachers, you won't get that one. But there are 9 subjects that are in here, so you can like start reviewing for U.S. history, or check out something that you want to do that you're not sure if you're ready for next year. Maybe you want to do it. Or like self-study for like human geo, for example. That's a really good one to self-study for, especially if you're taking world. So once you're inside world history, just to like give you a quick rundown, I haven't done this yet this year, like actually just shown this in a live stream of what it looks like. My internet is getting a little slow. It's not good when it's loading forever, huh? So basically we've got everything that you need in here. So I've got all of the resources from this school year so far. So, like if you're needing some stuff for period 1, you can see the live stream that I did for unit 1 back in September inside here. So you've got the video, Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. I've got notes on the streams, key questions that you should be able to answer. And I've timestamped the entire thing so that you can just jump to exactly where you need it. And then you've got all the resources. Anything I mentioned in the stream, the slides are here. Any other videos that would be useful for you. So, if you're looking for just like an extra layer of support, like your teachers are doing awesome already, and I want to partner with them. I want to complement that, right? So like if you're looking for extra things, this is sort of like it's kind of like a prep book, but you got everything. And all the Plus members will have access to our live streams in May. So I'm going to be doing like mega streams of like a 2-hour, the whole course in one session just for Plus members. So you'll get all your questions answered. And you can ask me anything in here too. So you can like post your questions, create a new post and see that. In a few months, next month, we're going to be launching Fiveable Trivia. And so you'll be able to play for free. But if you want to be able to play the games beyond just when they're live, then become a Fiveable Plus member and support us and get all the things. And let's help you guys get some fives. What is a penal colony? It's like where it's like a prisoner colony. So they literally like sent their prisoners to Australia to like make space for more people. It's a weird story. Okay, so can I explain Japan? So again, we're going to talk about Japan and the silver flow next week. All right, so definitely RSVP for that for next week. So I'm not going to talk about Japan and the silver flow tonight. The Meiji Restoration is not in this time period. So the Meiji Restoration is in Japan, but happens in the 19th century. So that will come up in a couple weeks, like first week of February. We'll talk about industrialization and westernization. That'll be Meiji Restoration. Okay, so this one, so silver trade again next week. How did labor migration change when expansion into the Western Hemisphere occurred? It increased, right? So like the more globalized we are in terms of trade, where the more connections there are, the more movement of people there is. So a lot of that movement, a lot of that labor migration was forced. And this is a perfect example of like, if you want to know more about the coerced labor systems, like Patrick Lassiter did an awesome job last week going through exactly what you need to know about them. And so that video is up and cuts like it's exactly the answer to this. So like so much of the coerced labor systems expand in this time period, just like transatlantic slave trade, like the Mita system, the encomienda system, but in particular chattel slavery coming from Africa. And so as Europe and Afro-Eurasia expands into the Americas, these labor migrations are going to increase. But there's also not just coerced labor. There's also like, free labor. People do travel freely too, like to the Americas for opportunity, or for like indentured servitude, right? So they're not being forced to stay. They're like tied to their job for like 7 years or for a certain amount of time, but it's all going to increase. So just, more food is being produced, more jobs are created, more production is needed, and there's just a general just flow of people across the world. And actually, there's an entire key concept in period 5 all about migration, because it's just like by the time you get to the 19th century, it's just massive, the amount of people that are moving around. All right. Did hierarchies based on race only begin in this time period? So people, like what Leah had commented on here, people have been separating themselves into different hierarchies for centuries, right? That's not new. Hierarchies are not new. As soon as the Neolithic revolution happens, we now see social stratification. We see hierarchies. But in earlier times, this was more based on class, right? Based on wealth. So if you're poor, you are a lower, level on the hierarchy. If you had money, you would be higher up. Being based on race, like people have separated themselves based on ethnicities, and in some cases based on race. But this is definitely when like racial hierarchies like really take hold. This is like the most massive example of it. And I think part of the reason for that is just the like new connections of people, right? Like you don't necessarily have this connection between the old world and the new world. You don't have, I mean, of course, there's mixed people before this time period. It's not like there aren't, but just everything is heightened, everything is increased. So there's just more. There's just more people that are connected. There's also a different, like in the Americas, in North America, the predominant like racial theory was segregation. Stay separated, right? So like keep the black race separate from the white race was literally the movement. That was the policy. Those were the laws for a long time. No like mixed marriage, no mixed children, segregation. Same with like indigenous populations, right? Segregation. Move them away. Don't encourage any sort of intermixing. In South America, it's completely different. It's literally like encouraging mixing in order to whiten the race. Totally different, which is why like racism looks so different in Brazil than it does in America. Because in Brazil, you have way more mixed race people. And so that spectrum is just so different. So, I might be considered a person of color in America and experience racism because of that. Whereas in Brazil, I would be considered white and would not would have a lot more privilege because of that. Because the it's not so divided, right? So there really is that mixture. And so this is like when things just like take hold the most. So long story long, no, it doesn't begin in this time period, but yes, it's heightened way more dramatically than ever before. All right. AP World has so much content to learn and master. I know that in order to understand it and be able to use it, I need to make connections across time periods. What kinds of connections should I be making in and to this era that will help me remember these empires? Okay, so the best advice that I can give you in order to make connections, there used to be a whole point on the rubric that was called synthesis, where you would literally show examples of like this thing happening in history in this time and in this time, right? Like we did today. We talked about like how empires legitimized rule in Rome or in early China and in the Mughal Empire, right? And you can even like bring that to like modern times. You can see examples of really just like things repeating themselves. Sometimes they might look a little bit different. They may have been caused by something different. They may have different effects, but it's like the same things that you keep seeing. That's the best way to study for AP World, is just to keep making those connections. So as you're reading, as you're looking at period 4, keep connecting to times before and times after, like as you keep going. Finding those similarities, or just in the same time period. We know that the Mughals did, legitimize their power through architecture, and so did the Europeans, right? So like that's happening in both places at the same time, but it's something you can see across place. So any examples that you can find that whether it's political or social or economic, whatever it is, things that people do across space and or time. So, same time period, different place, or different time periods. Can I use synthesis to get the analysis and reasoning points in the essays? Yes. So it used to literally be its own rubric point, and then they put it underneath that second analysis point. So this is something you can do in the essays. It's definitely, I think it's one of the harder ways to get that point at this time. Like I think as teachers have learned more about grading these essays and understanding this rubric, a lot of teachers don't recommend like going for the synthesis point. But I think it's such an awesome way to study. And you can use it. So if you have an awesome synthesis, you should use it in your LEQ. So that's what I would do, is like when you take notes for every chapter, come up with like ideas, come up with connections, when did this happen before? All right, how many questions we got? All right, I'm going to do a few more questions. What's a good way to study better for the SAQ and DBQ exams for period 4? I know that multiple choice practice questions are a good way to go for multiple choice, but it's kind of hard to judge my own writing. That's an awesome question. So I would practice individual points. I know that it's hard to like know whether or not your writing is correct, but what you can do is like look at other examples. Like College Board will post like samples that have been written before, and I would just practice like point by point. Like practice the thesis statement. Watch videos to practice that. You can also, as a 5 Plus member, you could practice and post in the discussion sections, and I'll look at them, right? Like I'll take a look at what you have. So like there really isn't a place for you to get feedback on your short answer questions, your document-based questions, and that's something that I can help you with, and that we'll be doing in the live streams as well. So, you can write a whole practice essay and send it to me, and I'll look at it for you, or other students will look at it as well. All right. Definitely not. All right. Penal colony, we already did. Okay, I'm just gonna do one more question. A lot of these I kind of already answered, so I don't want to like take time again. Okay. Let's see. All right, I'll do this one. Was the Portugal Empire the empire that wanted to control the spice trade? Yeah, they all kind of did. And to answer that question below, like what do we need to know about the spice trade? It was incredibly lucrative and was a point of competition between people, like this is between the empires. It's just like it's a profitable trade network, and so people want it. The empires want it. And the Portuguese would have been one. The Dutch were they're all in on it. Like they all want a piece of it. But the Portuguese definitely do have quite a few colonies that are connected to that. This book, The World That Trade Created, sounds dope. I haven't read it, but I'd like to. All right, y'all. So that's it for tonight. I hope to see you guys again next week. So again, Silverflow, DBQ, Patrick Lassiter will be back to talk about DBQs, and that should be an awesome session. So RSVP for it below. Just scroll down on the page and make sure you're here. This website is exactly where we're going to be doing all of this. So you'll come back to this exact same page next Monday at 8, every Monday at 8 p.m. So tell your friends, tell your classmates, spread the word. I'm trying to like make a big impact on scores. Like I really want more kids to pass this exam. I want there to be just a wave of 4s and 5s, and just I just want you guys to feel great about it and to be like marching into a push. Like I totally got this. I get it. I know what I need to look at. This comment from a teacher here, knowing how to know what you need to know for the exam. Definitely look at the key concepts. Key concepts are gold, Look at I've got videos up on the Think Fiveable YouTube channel for each key concept. So there's like 19 videos that literally cover each key concept. And that just shows you exactly what you have to know, because it can get really overwhelming in AP world because there's just so much. It's all of the world, it's like it's a lot. So stay grounded in the patterns, in the causes and the effects, like really focus on those big picture ideas, and then use the other details to support with evidence. So if you can find a big change over time, then you look at the details to support that. So just keep that focus as you read, as you take notes. And for those of you that were like, I don't read, start reading. You're going to really wish you did when it comes down to April into May. If you're not reading and doing your notes, do them. It's not just because your teacher wants to give you work to do. It's because there's a lot to know, and they need you to read about it. So yeah, I'm sure they're telling you the same thing, but I'm going to echo them. Do your homework. And I'll see you guys next week. All right. So period 4, silver flow, DBQ next week. So awesome. So if this was helpful for you, hit a 5 in the chat, because that's what we're trying to do, is get 5s. You're all just going to put the little like carrots. Dope. All right. Peace out, y'all. See you guys later. Maybe the next time I see you, the government will be open.